Welcome to my family room, just like that. Take a seat, and thank you for being here today. I think you're going to be really glad that you showed up. We're going to have a little discussion, conversation on mental health today. And so I want to invite up our three amazing guests, and then we'll get to know them a bit. So Jeff, Jane, and Mary Kate, if you would make your way to the stage, would you give them a 10 a.m. welcome into our living room? Come on in. I also, while they're getting seated, want to remind you all that it is Monarch March, as you can see from my dad's shoes. People care a lot about the shoes that pastors wear for some reason these days. And so we want to honor all the dads out there the month of March by wearing these puppies that can't wait to log into TurboTax, I'll tell you that. Welcome to Monarch March, and your monarchs are all in your gift baskets. Thanks for being here today. Before we get into the stuff, let's get to know you three. We'll start with Jane. Some of you yesterday got to go on the Celebrate Black Austin tour led by Jane and her fiance, Brian. Incredible people, answered prayer in so many ways in our church, and Jane is such an important leader and voice. And so thank you for being here. Tell us a little bit about yourself, specifically also in this world of mental health.
Like you said, my name's Jane. I moved here from Missouri last August with my fiance, Brian. I am currently a graduate student at Seminary of the Southwest. Everyone's always like, you go to UT? No, I go to school across the street. And I am studying for my master's in clinical mental health. And it was really important for me to go to a seminary because I really want to learn how to integrate religion into my practice.
I thought it would be awesome for us to hear from somebody who is studying this right now. You know, we all read like articles that people send us on social media, and God knows who writes those and what all we read sometimes. But to have someone who is really devoting her time and life right now to studying this here in this present day. So thank you for being here. And will you give a little more of the why you're doing this? Because to me, this feels like such a heavy field to go and carry a lot of burden. What feels like to me would be so much stuff. Why are you doing this when you could be doing a million things?
Yeah, so my mom still wants me to be a doctor. She's still like, it's not too late to go to medical school. But I was a psychology major during my undergrad, and during my courses, I basically had like a miraculous enlightening. And I feel like through my readings and my assignments in this specific class, attachment theory, I was kind of able to trace the roots of my own generational trauma. And by doing so, I felt so enlightened and free of burden. And I just thought if I could just help just one person, specifically in the African or African-American community, heal from those traumas, I will feel like I have accomplished my God-given purpose.
It's awesome. And I have a strong feeling there's going to be a lot more than one person that you help.
I hope so.
Yeah, heck yeah. Jeff, you've been at this church for a while now, and Jeff and his wife, Deb, are a gift to this place. They provide so much joy for us and wisdom as well. They teach Discover courses. Shout out to Discover courses. Sign up for one today in the lobby or on our website. They are teaching one on the Gospel of John. And so I highly recommend, if you want to grow in your faith, if you want to know Jesus and seek him, sign up. So Jeff, you're a man of many talents. Tell us a little bit about yourself and this field that you're in.
Well, I'm going to be leading a tour to celebrate Old Austin here soon. I'll let you know when that's coming up. Like Jane, I too wanted to kind of pursue my faith, explore it more deeply. Went to seminary soon after giving my life to the Lord in my early 20s. Thought I was going to be a pastor as I was going through that. God never called me to be a pastor. I think I figured out now it's because I refused to wear a man bun.
You would look so good. I've been trying to get Jeff to do this for a while now.
So, but after seminary in my late 20s was somewhat adrift, and there was this childhood dream of being a physician that Deborah gave me permission to pursue, and I say that literally because it was a 10-year journey, and you don't embark on that without the two of you agreeing to it. And So went into that, and through the course of that, discovered psychiatry was where my heart was. You know, working with people with mental illness. Hadn't enjoyed the psychology coursework in the classroom, but the actual work, it just resonated with me. So that Deborah knew I was going to be a psychiatrist before I knew, and.
You've been at it for a while now. Why have you stayed? Why have you stuck through difficult times and walked through so many stories with people and so much? What has drawn you back to continue doing this?
I have a passion for it. That quite simply is a calling, and I love what I do, and I see change coming about in people's lives, and as a believer, it's an interesting thing to watch God take the training that I have and His Holy Spirit, sometimes in ways that I'm able to recognize, and I'm kind of blind to that more often than I care to admit, but will transform what's going on, and it's just a wonderful thing to be used in that way.
You're being humble. What is your title? What is it that you are?
I'm the professor of psychiatry at the UT Dell Medical School.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm just Doug and Ryan's college buddy, so which one of us knows more, Jeff? I'm not sure. Okay, Mary Kate, it probably has one of the most challenging roles in this whole church, and you didn't know that, and you don't know her, but she is my counselor. Imagine that. So we say a lot from the stage that we value counseling and therapy, and that we push people. We have paid for tons of people from this church to go and get help. And I think when we say that we do this personally, a lot of you don't believe us. Like, oh, you're just saying that because you should. And so I thought, how cool would it be to actually have the woman that I sit in a room with. What's that? Proof that... And Steph and I went to, we started meeting with Mary Kate last summer, and it's been tremendously just awesome for us individually and as a married couple. We have gotten the advice that the best time to go to counseling is before you need it, and I think we were in a combination of both. And so Mary Kate has been just a great gift to us, and today a gift to our church. So tell us a little bit about yourself, and welcome to Red Rocks Church, the 10 a.m. service.
Woo-hoo.
A good crowd.
It's a party. Yeah, so I am a new transplant to Austin. Don't hate me. Didn't come from California. Nothing against those that did. But you are welcome. I got my undergrad at Texas State in psychology, and then went up to Purdue in the Midwest for, Purdue, to get my degree in marriage and family therapy, which is so fun, right? I knew I wanted to be a therapist just because I was interested in personality psychology. Was super into the Myers-Briggs in high school. Thought I was so philosophical and cool. And then now the Enneagram is like the go-to. It's so obsessed with it. But then finding out marriage and family therapy is a thing. I'm like, okay, love that. Love. And love getting to have, right? Love getting to see all different parts of the system and different storylines behind why is there a problem in the family or in the relationship or in a certain person. So, such a joy.
It's awesome. When we started meeting with Mary Kate, we had individual sessions where we both went and sat with her for an hour, and that was one of the best hours of my life. And I walked in kind of like, I don't know what to expect, and I think I'm fine, and walked out of there like, oh my gosh, that felt good to unload so many things that I just don't say or haven't said. And so I know that I carried some stigma around this myself, that there were times where I felt like, I don't even know, I don't need that. I go talk to somebody, I can just chat it out with myself, kind of thing, and have seen in my own life how powerful taking steps can be. And so one of the goals today for us is to help tear down some stigma around this and to help illustrate to you that you're not alone wherever you find yourself right now when it comes to mental health Jeff, you kind of broke down really well a broad audience of people right here. You guys can't diagnose from the stage. You can't solve everybody's individual struggles, but how we kind of fall as a vast population of people into this mental health world. Will you break that down for us?
Sure. As we were talking about this, it occurred to me, and this is not written in a textbook. This is the world according to Jeff, that we fall into three broad groups of people. Those of us who at any point in time are mentally healthy and spiritually healthy. And then those of us who are mentally struggling, being a second group. And I think the sermons over the last few weeks, for those of us who are mentally struggling, we're in a tough situation. We don't have a mental illness, but we're really struggling with something at a mental and emotional level. The things that you've heard from our pastors these past several weeks are really useful tools, to help the healing from those struggles, and for those of you who are mentally healthy, to keep you in that place. And then there's a third group where at some points in time where we may be experiencing a mental illness. And the thing about a mental illness is it's a trap. It sucks you down into a pit that's very hard, to climb out of without really good help from a variety of different types. And I think the things that you've heard over these past few weeks, if you're there, you may find those things really difficult to act upon. And I want to offer you a word of encouragement, because if that's true, if you're trapped in a mental illness right now and you cannot act upon those things, don't then heap condemnation upon yourself because of that. God's got another path for you. In addition to those things, not instead of, in addition to those things, to help you find freedom, which is why you're here today.
Yeah, that's good, man. So, I think a lot of times that exact feeling of condemnation, of shame, of guilt, it can put people into a place of feeling like I'm the only person. That truth spoken is for everybody else in the room except for me. Freedom or hope is possible for everybody else except for me. I'm the only one who's dealing with this. And Jeff took kind of a population of our church, and based on percentages, gave me some stats to help illustrate to you that you're not alone. And I want to look through these really quickly. So right now, between 3 services, kids, volunteers, there's about 1,200 people who come through here on a Sunday. And based on that pool of people, let me walk through some things. During the past year, 252 of us suffered from one or more mental disorders. 229 of us had an anxiety disorder. 101 of us had major depression. 64 of us had alcohol use disorder. 43 of us had post-traumatic stress disorder. 34 of us had bipolar disorder. 25 of us had an eating disorder. 14 of us had obsessive compulsive disorder. 8 of us had schizophrenia. As children, 348 of us had a parent who abused drugs or alcohol. 312 of us were emotionally abused. 196 of us witnessed domestic violence in our home. 180 of us were physically abused. And 146 of us were sexually abused. And the most important word, I think, in all of those is us. Because what it points to is that you are not alone. There was not a one person next to any of those things. So wherever you're at, and that's our prayer today, is that condemnation, stigma, the things that you may be feeling about yourself as in isolation as the only person would be ripped away, and that you would find freedom, maybe just starting with the knowledge that you are not alone, and the statistics back that up. But this can be such a difficult conversation to enter into, and especially in the church. And so I'd love to hear you guys speak to the stigma and speak to the difficulty that so many of us have to go talk to someone or take steps or even enter into our mental health conversation. Jane, you want to start us?
Yeah, so I think for a lot of people, when we think of mental health, we think of it as this unseen force, just like we think of God. He's an unseen being. We cannot see him, but we can feel him, just like we can feel anxiety or depression. And sometimes we even grapple with the thought of understanding what God is. So imagine if you can barely understand this end-all, be-all, how can you understand mental health?
Mary Kate?
Yeah, I think that, there's a ton of cultural groups that have stigmatized mental health and accessing mental health services. And so for us as Christians specifically, I think that the struggle is with this idea that to speak out loud the struggles we're having, or especially to go get help, go see a therapist, would be to admit I'm broken, or to say I'm broken, or I have failed, I haven't figured this out myself. And obviously that's contrary to what we believe as Christians, that God has already redeemed us and has already saved us. So it feels opposite to what we believe, if we believe that going to get help means that you're broken, and it doesn't, right? But it is to say you're hurting. And then there's this idea, right, if we're redeemed or saved, that we shouldn't be hurting, we shouldn't be struggling, we shouldn't be ill. But God doesn't promise us that. And in fact, Paul tells us, our power is made perfect in weakness. So I see actually instead as going to therapy as maybe the step God has for you towards healing, and the step to figuring out, what is the strength in this weakness? What does this tell me about myself? What can I learn about myself or about God through this? And it just provides that space to do that with a guide.
That's good. Jeff, you've shared with me that you've some church baggage comes along with stigma and the challenge to talk about this. Will you speak to that?
Yeah, I think some of the stigma is self-imposed in that, so it's not just others in society judging us, but judging ourselves. And I think part of it comes from, if I'm having a health problem, if I'm having asthma, then there's a problem with my lungs. If I'm struggling with hypertension, there's a problem with my heart, my cardiovascular system. But if I'm struggling with a mental disorder, the way that we tend to conceptualize it is, there's a problem with me. I would never say I am diabetes, but people do say I am bipolar. And their entire identity gets wrapped up in a mental disorder with which they've been diagnosed. And part of that comes from this conception of mind versus brain. And years ago, within the medical field, we separated the two. That's why we have neurologists and psychiatrists, simply because it was so complex. But what we've learned is that when people are experiencing a mental illness, a mental disorder, you can actually demonstrate functional abnormalities in how the brain is working, abnormalities that can be corrected, that come about through various means, but can be corrected through medications, yes, but not necessarily medicines, right? Good effective therapy, talk therapy can also help correct those things. And I think recognizing that it's not me, but it is something within me, a part within me that's not working properly. Because, from my Pentecostal background, there was a time when my grandfather, where it wasn't just, you were abandoning your faith if you sought mental health care. It was you were abandoning your faith if you sought any health care. That God has provided divine healing, and therefore, if you go see someone to treat your pneumonia, you're exhibiting a lack of faith in God, and that still remains with us in the mental health field.
Yeah, that's I think, damage done by a misunderstanding of how God works through common graces and how he equips people and allows us to learn and to develop practices and medicine and things that can help in the process. And so I appreciate you guys helping speak to that from a professional side. I want to ask you, we hear a lot, this is, mental health is worse than ever. Anxiety, it's the age of anxiety, everything right now seems upside down and horrible. Do you think that in the digital age, here in the 2000s, that things truly are just, when it comes to mental health, worse than ever? Or are there layers to that you would say that you see?
I think Mary Kate has some good truths on this, but I will say from my perspective, I've gotten just a lot of awareness. As a Nigerian in my culture, we struggle with a lot of trauma and a lot of toxic traits and a lot of unhealthy generational habits. And through social media, I've been able to see Nigerians across the entire globe come together and be like, this is not okay. We need to stop doing what our parents are doing. We need to break these generational curses, and here's how we can be better. It's not just me and my sister at home talking about it. It's all of us on a global level coming to social media to talk about this. And so I think in the digital age, there's been a lot of awareness and light shed to this, which I'm very grateful for. But I know, unfortunately, that comes with a lot of misinformation, which I know you got some
Speaking
thoughts
to
on
the
that.
misinformation. No, and I do see our, especially our youth, really benefiting from being able to get access to things that they normally wouldn't have access to, either because their parents aren't willing to take them to maybe go to a therapist or gain that knowledge, or because they can't afford it or don't know how to find affordable care. And so there is a good side to it for sure, to be able to access some of these resources online. But I especially am so scared of TikTok and how it shows you more of what you're interested in, but the people that are posting, and they mean well, sharing information about certain buzzwords and kind of redefining what they mean, and categorizing them. I have so many people come in saying that they have disorders that don't even exist. I'm like, explain to me what that disorder is.
They learned it on TikTok University.
Right. And so there's now, to me, there's this standard among our youth to have an illness, to be in that illness category, to be able to be a part of something. And as teens, that's all you want, is to be a part of a community and to feel heard. And so now you have to have anxiety, depression, or much, more extreme things like suicidal thoughts, self-harm, to prove that you're hurting. So that's where I see it spiking up.
So it's a combination of, the effects of social media, which can be both positive, negative, the digital age, but also more awareness, which is a good thing, but then can also create this misinformation. And it's not, do you struggle? It's what do you want to choose? What
Right.
do you struggle? So
Right.
Jeff, you've watched this whole field collide with the digital age. What's your take on that question?
Well, I think you summarized it really well. I mean, there's a lot more awareness now because of how readily accessible information is about things. These mental disorders are not new. We knew about post-traumatic stress disorder hundreds of years ago. It just wasn't called PTSD. It was called combat fatigue and war neurosis and those sorts of things. Postpartum depression was identified 3,000 years ago. But there's this tremendous awareness because of how readily available information is, but also in this age where technology, it just has a tendency to isolate us, and we view electronic relationships as on a par with human relationships. And I don't know if you guys have noticed, but you spend time on Twitter and Facebook, people are mean. They're really cruel, much more so than they would be, to your face. Even those of us who walk with the Lord sometimes are mean.
Yeah,
So
that's true. What's your TikTok, Jeff?
I don't have a TikTok nor a Twitter account because I knew that the likelihood that I would tweet something that would get me in trouble far exceeded the likelihood I would tweet something that would be productive.
Self-awareness, Jeff.
Yes.
It's brilliant. Okay, let's talk practical here for a little bit. We had a lot of great questions come in through social media this week, and I tried my best to kind of categorize and hit the main topics. And so if I don't ask your specific question, I apologize, don't be offended, but trying to speak to the main things. And let's talk practical. A big question that people asked was, how do I help somebody else that's struggling, maybe with a mental disorder? Some people asked about what are healthy boundaries. So how do you navigate a relationship where someone you love is dealing with mental illness?
I'll let the professional speak first, and I'll add my 2 cents in.
Well, speaking to the boundaries is a big one right now. People are trying to figure out, and I think if any of y'all have read the Boundaries book, right, by Cloud and Townsend, it's really great for Christians to know how is actually my boundary isn't just benefiting me, but benefiting the other person. And so for some people to be able to grow, and maybe if they have trauma responses that aren't actually helpful but have worked for them in the past to get what their needs are met, being super clear with what your expectations are. Hey, if you're reactive to me, if you're screaming at me, I'm going to have to leave the conversation. I care about you, though, and I want to know what's underneath that reactive response. So expressing that care and not being condemning, but to say, I want to help you learn that you can actually be heard by me, and I can care for you without you having to go to those extreme measures. And I'm thinking especially with PTSD right now, there's so many other avenues that it's like you have to have different boundaries, different approaches. But I think in general, too, is just saying, get to the emotion for people. If they are saying things to you that you just don't get, just listening and trying to hear, trying to be non-condemning, just someone feeling like someone's actually listening and trying to understand. And if you don't, ask more,
If building upon what Mary Kate just shared about not being condemning, I think one of the things we have to recognize is that when we reach out to someone and express concern about, are you doing okay? Part of what we have to recognize is there's, in all likelihood, a lot of self-condemnation already operative. And the very fact that you're reaching out to them can be heard as, oh my gosh, everybody knows I'm defective. And so making a point to communicate with them, there's no shame here. There's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, whether they have a mental illness or not. And this is all about, helping you find a path to where God can bring you to, to be the person that He created you to be. You can certainly, as a good friend, offer emotional support and even advice, which can be very sound, and that's a wonderful thing. But don't confuse that with psychotherapy. And because a lot of times, I know when we were talking earlier this week, you raised the question, Ethan, about, well, why do I need to go see a therapist if I've got a good friend? And let me share with you an example to illustrate the point. Some years ago, I saw someone who came into my office, and I work with pregnant and postpartum women primarily, and she was having recurrent thoughts of stabbing her newborn baby to death. Okay. So think about it. This is your girlfriend, and she comes and confides in you, I'm having these thoughts of stabbing my newborn baby to death. Encouragement and comfort is not going to resolve that. But if I can get her connected with someone who's an expert in exposure response prevention therapy, and don't worry, I'm not going to go into details of that, I know that I can help her find a path to delivery and freedom from that.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you can, if you're a friend in the situation, don't be what you're not. If you're not a therapist, don't try to be one. If you're not a psychiatrist, don't try to be one. And we have, because I think of social media, a lot of peer therapy going on, maybe not based on a lot of actual education, understanding. And so that's good stuff. Jane, you said you had 2 cents to add in here.
Patience and grace. That is my answer. That's what you need. If you have a loved one who's struggling with something, and let's say they do start counseling or they do start that medication, change is not going to happen overnight. And so that person themselves is already putting a lot of pressure to heal. So as a loved one, as a friend, what you can do is have patience. That it's gonna take time, and it's a journey, and it's a process.
Yeah, it's good stuff. So speaking to the practical, you shared, for those that feel pretty mentally healthy, the things that have been spoken the last couple of weeks, the tools in our tool belts, the practices, keep doing those things and make those a priority. Let's speak to somebody who's struggling right now first with some form of anxiety, depression, something in the mental health world that may be asking the question, are there steps I need to take right now? Is this something that I just can battle through, what would be your advice to somebody that's in the midst of struggle right now?
I would encourage them to seek someone that they know has wisdom. And number two, because they may not know where it's going, someone who also has the wisdom to keep things confidential. And sometimes that can be a person, in your family. But most certainly a wonderful place to reach out is to your pastor. And your pastor is well positioned to know, is this a struggle that I can help through with some pastoral counseling, or is there something here, an illness that requires some more systematized type of counseling?
Yeah, and I'd say on our behalf, we have to make that distinction, a lot, to tell somebody, hey, I'm a pastor, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychiatrist. And so, hey, I'll meet with you and we can speak from a spiritual counsel side, but I am going to push you to resources that are beyond my scope, which, by the way, on our website, we have resources for, tangible tools for you, places to go, ways to seek help that have been provided from people like this. And so on our website, go find that resource page as well today, practical tools for you. Let's hear from you guys when it comes to, I'm in the midst of struggle. What would you say to that audience?
I think Jeff said it well. I think in general, getting okay with the fact that pain and hurt exists in life, and that's what God calls us to live abundantly, and that's a part of abundance of life, is not just to only experience confidence, empowerment, happiness, joy, laughter, but sorrow, grief, pain. There's purpose in that. There's wonder in that. And so I think those that actually can end up being in the healthy category and not just kind of stuck in a struggle, is they're okay with hurt in their day. They're okay with a bad day. And it doesn't become this it's all of me, and I need to cut it off,
Yeah, we read this book called The Color Monster to my son, and it's all about, you're going to feel these things. Some of them you may not like. And it's a very simple way of saying, how do we walk through this? How do we deal with this? And I think it's also so true what you said, that those sorrow, pain, these are part of the human experience that Jesus experienced. Jesus didn't just have, joyful, every day is awesome his whole time here. And so he's with us in those things as well, because he experienced them too. Jane, what would you say?
I think just kind of to add on to that, that pain leads to transformation. When we go through those lows, that's how we experience breakthroughs. And in order to move on to that next level of greatness that God is calling us to be, you have to walk through that fire. You have to feel those pains. You have to feel that low. And you use the tools that God has equipped you with, because they are there if you look, to get through that.
That's good. Two people struggling with a mental illness in this room. What would you say in terms of practical, but also imparting some hope, imparting some, you're not alone. Maybe you deal with this, you talk with people all the time. How would you hope somebody walks out of here today that is in the midst of a struggle with a mental illness?
Yeah, I would say very practically. Sometimes insight and just thinking through your problems and trying to focus on other things, it doesn't work. Sometimes your body is just having a response that it needs to get through, and if you can't find a single thing to do to feel better in that moment and you're freaking out, drink a glass of water. Our brain relies on water and oxygen. So you just drink a whole glass of water and see if you can come back to earth a little bit. And of course, try to breathe. And then in another sense, I would say, in Corinthians, where we talk about one body, many parts in Christ, I like to think of that internally, right? Where we've got parts of ourselves that are rock solid, confident, career-driven, empowered, and we've got parts of us that are hurting and are trapped in pain from the past, that are grieving, whatever. And if we think, if the foot says to the hand, "I'm not a hand, so I shouldn't be on the body," that doesn't make it less a part of you. You can't just run from it. And so, get good with it, befriend it, recognize, God put that in you. And it is a part of you, and it is meant to show you something about him. So, just kind of befriending that illness so it can be redeemed too.
Yeah, a lot of times I think it can feel like, God, why did you give me a mind? I wish you just hadn't. But he did. And he is there with you. He meets you there. Would you speak, Jane, to our minds? And Romans 12 says we can be transformed by the renewing of our minds. I know that's your favorite passage of Scripture, so will you speak to that?
It's lecture time. I brought my class notes for you guys because I really wanted to share this. And I'm sure my professors would be surprised because I look like I'm half asleep in class. But so God has literally given us the authority to rewire our brains, and that's called neuroplasticity. So I'm going to break it down to you guys really quickly. So your brain has billions of neurons. When these neurons form and connect together, they're called neural pathways. So the thoughts, the skills, the behaviors you have, these are what's in those neural pathways that control our thoughts, our memories, our emotions, our feelings, etc. When we start evoking new behaviors or new thoughts, these new neural pathways start forming. The more you repeat these habits, the more you repeat these thoughts, these neural pathways get cemented. So let's say you want to start a new habit. Let's say you've got road rage. And you say, I'm going to wake up tomorrow, and instead of cussing somebody out, I'm going to smile and wave. And the more you do that, the more that becomes cemented in your brain. And then that old habit of being so triggered when someone cuts you off dies down. And so God has literally given us that authority that any new habit, any new skill, any new behavior, any person that we want to become essentially can happen by the renewing of your mind.
It's good. Jeff, I think that there's people that feels impossible. Maybe they're in a place right now where it's like, I hear this truth, but how, you've seen stories of victory from a place of like, how could this person possibly be healthy today after what they've gone through? But God has renewed minds. He has worked miracles in all kinds of ways. Would you close us out here and share a little bit about your insight into that?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that's important to remember is that, healing from mental illness and growing spiritually are not separate processes. They can very much go hand in hand. I had this experience 20-some years ago. I was working with a young woman who had the most horrific experience of sexual abuse growing up. She was sexually abused by her stepfather, who then passed her around to his brothers, her uncles, as well as her older stepbrothers. And this went on for years. And it was only after some period of time that her grandmother learned about it and was able to take her out of that situation. And her grandmother was a wonderful Christian woman, as she described to me. And her grandmother led her to faith. And so when I encountered her in her late 20s, around 30 years old, she was a person of faith. She believed in Jesus, and yet she was emotionally crippled. She couldn't go outside of her house without looking over her shoulder at every point. If her husband happened to roll over in bed and accidentally bump into her, it would trigger a panic attack. When she had a child and it happened to be a daughter, oh my gosh, her anxiety just went through the roof. How am I going to protect this little girl that I have? And I was working with her, and the severity of it, in her case, dictated medication. I was prescribing medicine. I got her connected with someone who knew what they were doing with trauma-focused therapy. The nature of her trauma, I couldn't do it because she needed a female therapist. And over a period of several years, saw just growth in her and improvement. And she came into my office one day. This was after several years, and she's beaming, and she's telling me about this thing she's been doing, where she's leading a support group of other young women who've had histories of sexual abuse, and seeing some tremendous progress and work being done in their lives. And as she's telling me this story, my mind flashed back to an experience I had when I was 10 years old. When I was a little kid, we lived near a swamp, and there was this nasty, smelly swamp close by, and we loved to go out there and play Army. And so I would go there, and one day I'm hiding, ready to ambush my buddies when they came over the hill, and I look over, and there's this white flower. Not a blemish on it, not a spot. And I remembered thinking at that time, that's weird. That sure seems out of place in this nasty, smelly, swamp. And I hadn't thought about it for, again, this is probably 20, 25 years later when I'm hearing her tell me this story, and my mind went back to that experience in the swamp. And it dawned on me, and as I shared earlier, Freud would tell me this was all about my countertransference to the patient. I think it was the Holy Spirit guiding me in the moment. But I shared with her, I said, I shared that story, and I told her, I said, your childhood is that swamp. It's nasty and ugly and will always be nasty and ugly, and those things should have never happened to you. But there's something new happening. And with God's help, something beautiful is being created. Your life is becoming, that flower. And it wouldn't have been possible without that past. And I said, now I'm not telling you that's why God let those things happen. I don't know why God let those things happen. But I do know this, that God can take that ugliness in your past, that ugliness in your life, and create something beautiful from it.
So good. Can we thank these three for being up here today? Would you guys stand to your feet? Gosh, what a beautiful depiction of a reality that's possible through Jesus and the means that he has for us. My prayer is today that you feel empowered in whatever step it is. Your miracle might be going back to pray with somebody on the prayer team today, having the strength to do that and invite somebody else into what you're going through. The miracle that you need right now might be going to counseling. It might be going to talk with someone else and get some professional help with trauma, with what you're going through, with a mental illness. God provides miracles and processes in all kinds of ways. We just tend to always want them right in the moment. But I believe that for every single one of us, I know that for every single one of us, because of his word, that all things are possible. All things are possible with him. That means freedom is possible. Healing is possible. A renewed mind is possible for you. He wouldn't give us the directive that tells us to be transformed by the renewing of our minds if it wasn't possible. And so I hope today that wherever you are, whatever you're walking through, you are not alone in this place. First and foremost, because God is with you. You have a family of people who are with you all around you right now, a prayer team that will pray with you, leaders that will talk with you, and you also have resources at your disposal to take a step, one step, because you don't have to settle for what the enemy has thrown at you, what life has dictated, but there is abundant life possible. And I want to pray that for you, and then we're going to sing one song of worship. So Jesus, would you seal what needed to be heard today in every mind in this place? I pray for walls to come crashing down. I pray for stigma to just die and be gone today. I pray for tremendous, miraculous healing that will happen in all kinds of ways, in stories and conversations and counseling sessions. God, I pray for a church of people, for people that feel alone right now to feel your presence in this moment, to know that you are there and that abundant life, that a renewed mind is possible. And I pray, Jesus, for white, beautiful flowers in the midst of swamps. In Jesus' name, amen.